been rereading all the things that have been written around 1989, 1990, 1991, and paradoxically the person who got best what was going to happen is somebody who is not famous for his intellectual power, and it was then Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle. He was kind of the favorite of the stand-up comedians, but he basically said the following: what we are witnessing today is an irreversible trend towards more democracy and more freedom, but of course this will change. And I believe this is quite important because the question which I'm going to ask is, first of all, why the 30th anniversary of 1989 is so different than the 20s? I'm even not talking about the 50s. Because then, even when we have been talking about crisis, we have been talking about crisis of democratization. Now it's different. We're talking about the crisis of liberal democracy. So paradoxically, the crisis of Central and Eastern Europe is related totally different to what is happening in the Western Europe itself. And I do believe something that came on the first panel, one of the most interesting illusions of 1989 was that the end of the Cold War means the East is going to change, but the West is going to remain the same. Paradoxically now we see to what extent the transformation of the post-Cold War world also affected Western liberal democracies. And the second thing which was important for me is to try to see how something that in very kind of an objective terms still can be very much perceived as success started to be conceptualized politically as a failure. Listen, it's not difficult to explain the level of resentment or disappointment in places like be it Moldova, be it Bulgaria, be it Ukraine, I'm not talking in Russia. But Poland, for the last 30 years, the GDP of Poland tripled. People are going to say about social inequality. Social inequality in Poland for the last 10 years has been declining, the Gini coefficient. 70% of the Poles declared that they're satisfied with their personal life. At the same time, basically, they're voting for political parties that are very critical to many parts of the political legacy of 1989. And when Adam Przeworski, one of the legendary figures in the democratic theory, was asked how you're going to explain the success of Law and Justice Party in Poland, he said, theoretically this should not have happened. So theoretically this should not have happened, but it has happened. And from this point of view, my question is, to what extent part of the crisis that we see today is related to some of the major expectations and some of the major ideas that have been rooted in 1989? This is what I'm going to talk about. And I'll start with the fact that people now is ridiculing very much Fukuyama's The End of History article. But the most interesting story is why it was so powerful in the imagination of people both West and East. Now saying, oh, how naive it was. Listen, it was naive, but obviously it was powerful if we're discussing it for 30 years. And I do believe this is important because there are three things that I do believe are critical about this article. First, by the way, the article was written in April 1989. It was before Tiananmen. Nobody was expecting the disintegration of the Soviet Union. And if you're going to read the article, everything moves. Ideas moves, capital moves, goods moves. The only thing that is not moving is people. Because it was basically based on the idea that the borders are going to remain the way it was. Because it was a kind of earlier stage. But secondly, he basically declared that there is a major rupture, and this rupture is not connected to the fact that, for example, then he didn't know and didn't expect that the Soviet Union is going to disappear. But he believed that communism as a project and model that even the communist leaders are interested in has lost its power. And as a result of it, paradoxically, what made so powerful the message of Fukuyama was also kind of the Marxist legacy within the Eastern Bloc, which always believed in the teleological idea of history. So if you had been socialized for decades that history has a final destination, it's much easier to agree that liberal democracy is the final destination of history than to believe that history does not have a final destination. And from this point of view, you end up with the story of what then was the end of history. And Fukuyama was not triumphalist if you read the article, but his major argument was the following. Now, at the end of the Cold War, there is only one political and economic model which is worth imitating, and this is Western democracies. Some are going to do it better than others. Some are going to succeed, some are going to fail, some are going to fake, but at the end of the day, this is the only model because liberal democracy is the other name for modernity. The very idea of modern society was very much a Western type of society. I'm making this argument because in the book was constantly claiming the following. This was true, and what was critically important, this was particularly how we East Europeans were perceiving the situation, because if there is one key word that explained 1989, it was the idea of normality. Talking about Schabowski's basically famous press conference, now in Germany they made a postcard out some of the notes that he has been taken during this famous press conference in which he announced opening of the wall. And in this note, it's very difficult to really read what he was writing to himself, but the word normal and normality was written 4 times on the page. And then what was the normality? Normality was the West. And it was in a certain way the West which was very much unarticulated. The West was Germany, but also the United States, it was France, but also Austria. It was political system and economic system together, and it was also the way of life. So as a result of it, for the first time in history, the idea of future was not ahead in time, but was next to you in space. And this explains one of the interesting stories. For example, you cannot imagine Trotsky taking a fellowship in 1917 and going to Oxford, because he believed that basically Russia was at the most avant-garde place in history, so basically he was much ahead of anybody else. But even Viktor Orban did his fellowship and went to Oxford because, in a certain way, the future was just on the west of you. I'm saying this because, as a result of it, 3 important things happened, and which is going to be my major argument. After every revolution, people are reading the places in which revolution takes place. But normally, this is the defeated party that is leading. It was the White Russians who left after 1917. It was the White French after the French Revolution. The first paradox of 1989 revolution was that after the success of the Liberal Revolution, the first to leave were the liberals. Because basically, if Germany is the future of Poland, why to wait when Poland is going to become Germany, then not going to Germany yourself, because you want to live in the future. This is the definition of every revolutionary mentality. I'm saying this because one of the totally underestimated factors in the way of changing sentiments towards 1989 in Central and Eastern Europe is the effect of the massive exodus of people. 25 million people is left for the last 30 years. And this happened in a kind of aging and shrinking societies. So this demographic factor was never being taken, and it was not taken because also for us as Europeans, opening of the borders was the best that happened to us, because we can travel. But on the other side, we were very much depressed that people around us traveled. And just to give you one example of this, to imagine the scale of the things that I'm talking about, in the period between 2007 and 2017, 3.4 million Romanians has left Romania, 70% of them younger than 40, and we're talking about a country of 20 million people. So then you're not going to be surprised that nevertheless that you have a quite good macroeconomic factors. Suddenly you end up with a society which is quite pessimistic about certain things because it sees itself aging and basically it sees the future problematically. And second problem is with the imitation itself. Imitation is a choice. Contrary to what many people are saying today, and I do believe this is particularly interesting in Germany, there was not a colonization of the East by the West because it was the East insisting to be the West. But at the same time, the fact that you decided to imitate does not psychologically reduce the factor that the relations between the model and the imitator is asymmetrical model. And from this point of view, I do believe that Fukuyama slightly underestimated the psychological tensions in a world in which the major division was between the imitated and the imitators, particularly in the cultural environment in which being original is so important. I'm saying this because there was a French philosopher, René Girard, who basically spent all his life working on mimesis. And he made a point which was critically important for our work. Basically, Girard said the following: the real imitation is imitation of desires. And by the way, his classical example is if you have a room of kids and toys on the floor, and there is toy in the kit of toys in the hands of one of the kids. When you ask the kids what is the toys they wanted to play with, they're always going to be this one toy that is in the hands of the kid. You want something because somebody else wants it. And from this point of view, the problem with the imitation is that when you want to be like somebody else, three important things follow. First, you acknowledge that he's better than you. Secondly, you want to replace him. You want you to be him. And third, as a result of it, the relations between the imitated and the imitator are antagonistic relations. And we know this very well also from the studies. I'm going to end up. Studies from the different generation of migrants. The first generation of migrants is basically seeing the integration in the host society as a major success. The second generation starts to get the psychological story of being treated as a second-class citizens and trying to insist on its own identity. I'm saying this because I do it at least partially explains the resentment that was mobilized by the populist parties in Central and Eastern Europe. And from this point of view, the football story that we were told, in my view, is the best example of this. People living and then you're losing your identity. And I'm going to end up with something that I read about a barber shop in East Germany, in which the barber has put a black and white photo of the GDR football team of 1974. And this is a great story. If you remember, in 1974, Federal Republic became the world champion, but in the groups, GDR has defeated Federal Republic 1-0. So this type of an identity, which became kind of the critical identity of East Germany, is critically important. And I'm ending on this. On the 30th anniversary, the major tensions did not come from Hungary and Poland, which in a certain way was already consumed politically in our analysis. It was the rise of AfD in Germany. And it was basically the fact that if reunification and basically imitation was the way the democratization was taking place, paradoxically the vote of East Germans, part of East Germans for AfD, asked the questions, to what extent this type of political development was also not one of the results in some of the problems that we're facing today. Thank you.